So hello again, this is Beth Schlachter and I'm Executive Director here at FP2020. Thank you so much for taking time to join us today for this webinar on the release of our 2017-2018 annual report that we're calling Catalyzing Collaboration. It's my pleasure to have you all with us today for this update on the FP2020 partnership, and we were very happy to launch the report well, it's been almost 2 weeks ago now, time flies, since many of us were all in Kigali for the International Conference on Family Planning, where we had the pleasure of officially launching the annual report. For those of you who are unable to attend, we're going to be discussing today key findings that featured in the report for this webinar. So I'm going to hand it over quickly to my colleague Emma Anderson, who's going to review some logistics for today's webinar, and then we'll launch into the details of the report. So Emma, over to you.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you everyone for joining us today. You should be seeing in front of you a presentation, and to the bottom there will be 3 pods. One will show you all attendees, one where you can submit questions for logistics, and another which will be a Q&A pod where we encourage you to ask us questions. In an event you are unable to reach us, you can email us at info@familyplanning2020.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. I'm going to say that last email address a little more slowly for people. So it's info, I-N-F-O, at familyplanning2020.org. And the 2020, of course, are numbers. All right, so let's jump into the report itself. Oh, well, first we actually have an agenda, so we'll do that. We're going to launch into the report, and then we're going to look at measures of progress, including financing for family planning, donor government assistance, and then we'll have time for a Q&A and talk about next steps and closing and where we're going to be going for 2019. So the report itself. Again, on November 12th, we released 2 versions of the report, a condensed print version that contains only the materials that partners have shared with us they find most useful to have in print. We did a survey last year that many of you may have participated in to help us refine what it is that we should put in the print report. And then the full report itself, which is online on our website at familyplanning2020.org/progress. The full digital report is among a variety of new features that you can find on our refreshed website, which was launched simultaneously with the annual report. And here you're going to find that the report is no longer a separate site, but it's integrated into a portion of the website that enables you, report readers, to more easily access relevant resources on the main site itself. And where you will find that particularly relevant is for each of the commitment countries, where the data on the annual report is integrated with all of the features for each of the countries as well. So we hope that that resource will be easier for you to use, more intuitive, and more valuable. But in today's briefing, we're going to discuss the themes of the report, including the critical role of rights-based family planning in universal health coverage, which is an emerging issue that I know people are quite keen to help explore together. We'll share insights from this year's latest data, particularly new data on adolescents and youth, and we'll also discuss the latest trends in financing for family planning, including validated domestic government expenditures for 31 FP2020 countries. So the top line is that this year, more women and adolescent girls than ever before are using family planning. As of July 2018, the total number of women and girls using a modern method of contraception in the world's 69 lowest income countries has grown to more than 317 million. This is 46 million additional users than existed in 2012, the year FP2020 was launched. And this is an increase that's approximately 30% greater than the historic trend. The use of modern contraceptives is growing fastest in Africa, and in fact, Rwanda is in the region where we're seeing the fastest growth overall in Eastern and Southern Africa. In Mozambique, for example, modern contraceptive prevalence rate, the MCPR, among all women has grown by 2.7 percentage points per year since 2012. That makes Mozambique by far the fastest growing countries. There are 13 countries that are growing at above 1% rate of growth, including Madagascar, which is at about 1%. And then we still see many countries that are below 1%, including Nigeria, for example, that has an MCPR of 0.3. So an increase in many places and in other places like Nigeria, keeping pace with population growth, accelerating to get beyond that by very much. Along with growth in the total number of contraceptive users, we're also registering other measures of improvement. Substantially more women are now taking advantage of postpartum family planning. Long-acting reversible contraceptives, which we call LARCs, are now more widely available, especially implants in Africa, which are the fastest growing method, and several countries are registering impressive uptakes in use across the LARC spectrum. The mix of available contraceptive methods has improved significantly in 20 countries, meaning that more women are able to find the short-term, long-acting, emergency, or permanent method that suits their needs and preferences. My colleagues Jason Bremner, Martin Smith, and Adam Wexler will delve more deeply into the key findings from the measurement section of the report and provide new and updated family planning financing data and analysis later in this webinar. The FP2020 partnership, we think, has been a historic success. And indeed, we certainly felt during ICFP that the community itself reflected on the impact of this partnership, where we've seen success, where we've been able to accelerate through greater alignment. And it was, I think, an important touch point for all of us to feel together how the movement has grown, what its value has been, and to start talking about what we want together to go beyond 2020. And we'll talk about beyond 2020 more in a minute. But as much as we've accomplished, we recognize that our original and very ambitious goal of 120 million additional users of contraception will not be reached by 2020. It will take a few years longer to reach 120 million, but we will reach it, likely sometime around 2025. Our commitment is as strong as ever, and we know that through greater alignment and greater visibility for family planning, that progress is accelerating, and there's no path to universal access that doesn't go through this additional 120 million women and girls, so we remain committed to each of those goals. Because of our focus on country action and country progress, today I'll speak first about our work with countries and then turn to the partnership's role and work with other sectors to support country progress. And I'll start by noting that the private sector work that we started last year has just been expanded under a new grant between the UK's Department for International Development and the UN Foundation. So we hope to see accelerated progress working with private or corporate sector colleagues as well going forward. So a bit of an update on the Family Planning Summit, which we know from 2017 generated a groundswell of new energy and new commitments for family planning, which were more detailed, targeted, actionable, and measurable than ever before. Our digital report features progress updates on this work with a special focus on the global goods that were announced at the summit. And there were 11 global goods, which were where partners aligned together to achieve a specific end. One example, we talk about the updated version of the Minimal Initial Service Package, known as the MISP, with a new specific objective on the prevention of unintended pregnancies in humanitarian settings. And this was launched at the 17th Interagency Working Group for Reproductive Health and Crises annual meeting in Athens, Greece, this time last year. We also provide information on the UNFPA supplies bridge funding mechanism, which was successfully operationalized in the first quarter of 2018, and how this mechanism allows for the expedited procurement of contraceptives and 4 critical medicines for maternal health, and enabling countries to avoid stockouts. The Youth Accountability Framework, another global good, was developed by the summit's Youth Advisory Group and designed to mobilize young people and youth networks to advocate for the full implementation of the commitments made by their governments. The framework helped to drive momentum for increased youth engagement and led to new commitments from youth-led organizations, including Copper Rose in Zambia, Les Aides de Cour, and Youth Health International, which recently formalized their commitments. Post-2017, from that summit, the FP2020 partnership continues to expand with new commitments in the past year from Egypt, Sri Lanka, and the Kyrgyz Republic. This brings the total number of commitment-making countries to 44. Commitments are a powerful tool for marshaling resources and galvanizing progress, and the vast majority, 93%, of additional users of contraception since 2012 are in the FP 2020 countries that have made a commitment to the partnership. We also have new commitment-making civil society partners, including Promundo, which focuses on male engagement. Our engagement with countries are at the heart of the FP 2020 partnership. The regional focal point workshops we organize bring together commitment-making countries, focal points representing government, civil society partners, and donors. As our engagement with countries has strengthened and evolved over the past couple of years, this evolution has also been reflected in our regional workshops, including youth representatives who participated alongside country focal points, strengthening the youth representative relationships with other key FP stakeholders in their respective countries. Our most recent workshop was held in early October for the 13 countries in the Asia region, including participation from Sri Lanka and the Kyrgyz Republic, the latest commitment makers, and that was very exciting that they were able to join us. In consultation with our regional focal points and as part of the evolution of our regional workshops, the Asia Regional Workshop's main objective was to strengthen solution-focused approaches to accelerating progress toward FP 2020 and beyond by analyzing progress to identify gaps and challenges, learning from other countries, including high-impact practices and best practices, prioritizing catalytic actions and interventions for the next 18 months, and reaffirming roles and responsibilities to support coordination and stakeholder engagement. At the regional workshop, focal points, youth representatives, and technical partners had the opportunity to focus in depth on 3 thematic areas: youth and adolescents, FP financing, and leadership and political will, as well as to learn from one another and to ultimately identify strategic priority actions for the next 18 months that will guide the Secretariat's engagement with these countries. The partnership, of course, is entirely voluntary. Governments and institutions make formal commitments, but there's no legal or financial mechanism to enforce compliance. Ultimately, partners themselves are accountable for the promises they make and the actions they take. Nonetheless, the FP 2020 platform provides an accountability framework for tracking and promoting progress, both globally and for each individual commitment maker. The FP 2020 accountability framework builds on the monitor, review, act framework used by Every Woman, Every Child. We extend the framework to include a 4th process, share, to capture the way in which FP 2020 promotes transparency and collaboration. Together, these 4 processes form a cycle of learning, action, and continuous improvement. Outcome tracking and commitment tracking both cycle through the monitor, review, act, and share sequence. The 2 accountability levels also function together in a feedback loop. Data on outcomes guide the work on commitments. Progress on commitments is in turn reflected in improved outcomes. So the slide that you see in front of you is the Secretariat's role in this accountability framework. And we recognize that each partner has their own role within this overarching structure. But what we wanted to demonstrate this year is how we see the Secretariat and our activity level sort of pushing forward and supporting commitment makers to realize their goals. This year as well, we also really focus on the connections for FP within the development paradigm. And we wanted to look more broadly than within maternal health and health itself, to also look at education, to look at impact on the environment, to understand the role of FP within humanitarian. So this is our take on the impact that FP has in other sectors as they look to reach their own goals. And we hope that you'll spend some time looking at the individual narratives that are within the report that sort of tell that story as we look to build out the FP 2020 partnership through 2020 and then beyond. So the collaborations that have flourished over the last year are an important step forward in that regard, and I have a couple to share with you. We have a fellowship that's been supported by CARE, that allows us to work more closely with humanitarian partners to support the provision of family planning in crisis settings, and with country partners to include family planning in domestic resilience strategies. And we think that's a particularly important area of our work because often development partners are working within a development context and humanitarian on relief, but that relief to development divide is not often staffed or planned for. And so we want to make sure that the family planning community is supported to engage in that area. In July, FP2020 also co-hosted a panel at the International AIDS Conference, the first time we've participated in that conference. And we're now starting to map out how we can align our work with partners in that sector, particularly in areas or in countries where we see HIV prevalence growing instead of diminishing over time, because that often maps to vulnerability to unintended pregnancy as well. So we want to get greater visibility on how we can align our efforts with the AIDS community. So I want to share this next slide to give a little bit more depth to our work on around global displacement. So this slide shows displacement for people who are displaced because of natural disasters, which are the blue dots, and people who are displaced because of conflict, which are the orange dots. And in 2017, there were over 34 million people who were displaced because of these particular forms of crises. When you add that to people who are already displaced or refugees who are living in camps, it gets to over 66 million people who are living in displacement. So the reason we focus on this is to demonstrate that displacement is a condition of life and something that we have to plan for as a family planning community. If we can plan for it, then we can recover more quickly. It'll cost less to recover, and we can demonstrate greater or provide greater access to family planning and other health interventions during times of displacement. So this map has been something that's really helped us to open up the conversation with partners around why we want to work with humanitarian actors to ensure that we're planning thoughtfully for health and FP interventions across this relief to development divide. Next slide. So looking beyond 2020, I think we're just maybe 5 weeks away from 2019. So 2020 is definitely just around the corner. And one of the things that we spent a lot of time talking about when we were in Kigali is what comes next. So being mindful that this partnership really is hitting its stride in terms of impact and the way that partners are shaping it to be most useful for them. We want to continue to build the partnership toward 2030, but we want to do that thoughtfully with all of you. So the early part of the year, we'll be launching a global consultation that will provide multiple ways of engaging to get your reflections on what's worked. What should we continue to do? What should we do more of? What should we do less of? How should we shape this partnership going forward? We've been focused really through an MDG paradigm that focuses on the lowest income countries, and the MDGs were around eradicating global poverty. The SDGs have changed that framework, so that we're now looking at universal access and improving health outcomes globally. So how do we retain a laser focus on the partnership and in those areas where we know so much work needs to be done, while thinking about concepts of equity and how we might want to engage with the broader world as well. So that consultation will be reaching out to all of you. We'll be sharing more information once it's formally in place and going, but we did have the FP2020 core conveners sort of open that conversation during ICFP, and we look forward to engaging with all of you much more deeply in 2019 to help shape what the next iteration of the partnership will look like. So my last slide, I'm just going to bring us back to the refresh of the FP2020 website to make sure that you all have a chance to go in and take a look. The architecture has been reworked with many thanks to a colleague, Kate Urban, who's worked very hard on this for us, so that it will be more usable to you. You'll be able to access country information much more easily, as well as other thematic areas like rights-based family planning, adolescence and youth, humanitarian, and our data hub. So we look forward to your feedback on how this is working and what more we can do to improve its usability over time. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Jason Bremner, who is going to take you through a deeper dive on the data. So Jason, over to you.
Thanks, Beth, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to all who are joining. The launch of FP 2020's annual progress report is the culmination of an annual process of engagement on family planning data that represents the efforts of many, many partners. And I thank all of you who participate in that process. And it's a privilege to work with all of you and to have the opportunity to present the data from this year's progress report. Next slide, please. As a reminder, the FP 2020 community, through a consultative process of measurement experts, has established a set of quantitative metrics that we call the 18 core indicators to help countries and the global community track progress annually across diverse dimensions of a family planning program. FP 2020 publishes annual estimates of progress on these indicators using statistical methods developed by Track 20 and partners that take advantage of all available nationally representative surveys and increasingly in some countries, the country service statistics. The estimates of the core indicators are produced through a network of country-based M&E officers trained by the Track 20 project and housed in government institutions in commitment-making countries, as well as through a process of data consensus meetings in each country to discuss progress. And the regularity of this process over the last several years has opened new spaces at many levels for analyzing, examining, discussing, and hopefully using data for decision-making. I won't spend more time on methods and definitions today, but full definitions for the indicators and information on the methodologies can be found in the progress report, as well as through FP 2020's Measurement Hub and the Track 20 website. This year's measurement section is organized into three main sections: contraceptive use, contraceptive method choice, and a special analysis on adolescents and youth. I'll touch on select highlights in each of these sections, but encourage you to explore the digital report for more detail. Okay, let's look more closely at the progress data that Beth discussed earlier in relation to additional users of modern contraception. What you see here is a graphic that shows the total number of contraceptive users by year across all of the 69 FP 2020 countries. And you can see on the left side of the graphic, and marked in light green, this large bar at the base of the graphic, that in 2012 there were approximately 271 million users of modern methods of contraception. And in each subsequent year, the total number of contraceptive users has grown. And now, in 2018, there are 317 million women and girls using modern methods of contraception. So comparing 2012 to 2018, you can see that there are now 46 million additional users of contraception. You can see the orange line that represents our trajectory since 2012 as compared to the historic rate of growth in the blue line below it. And this growth is approximately 30% greater than the historic trend. So we have bent the curve. I'd like to remind you, though, that countries have set their own goals related to contraceptive use, to expanded method choice, financing for family planning, adolescents, youth, and much, much more. And looking more deeply at a country level gives us a better sense of progress towards FP 2020 goals. This graph shows the average annual growth in the modern contraceptive prevalence rate across regions since 2012. The red lines represent the average annual growth for the region, and the circles represent the countries in that region. You can see on the upper left-hand part of this graph, Mozambique, the highest circle, which Beth mentioned, has had the fastest annual growth in contraceptive use. And you can see that rapid growth in modern contraceptive use across the African regions, as Beth mentioned earlier, in comparison to slower rates of growth in Asian regions on the right side of the graphic. But you can also see that in each region, progress varies greatly with a wide range between the different countries or the circles. The modern contraceptive prevalence rate across regions of Asia is growing by between just 0.2 to 0.4 percentage points per year, while in contrast, the pace of MCPR growth in Africa is close to 1% across the different regions per year. These differences can be in large part explained by looking at the S-curve, which we'll follow. Next slide, please. And the S-curve pattern of MCPR growth, which we've described in past reports and presentations, remains an important tool for understanding different rates of growth. And it helps countries to assess their trends and opportunities for growth, both at national and subnational levels. Countries are increasingly using data to assess and adjust their family planning programs, and an increasing number of countries are within reach of achieving the goals for MCPR growth that they've established as part of their FP2020 commitments. The S-curve is also helping us to set better goals, or more realistic goals, as new countries make commitments to FP2020. Next slide, please. Turning to a different measure, core indicator 4, or demand satisfied for modern contraception, is an indicator for the Sustainable Development Goals, and which includes ensuring universal access to family planning by 2030. And this figure shows the total contraceptive demand and the demand satisfied for each region for 2012, shown here in blue, and 2018 in green. Well, demand satisfied is a complicated indicator, and we've created a complicated graphic for you to explore more on your own time, but I'll walk you through it just quickly. What we see here is that the darker blue and darker green bars here at the bottom of each region bar are showing the contraceptive use for that region. The lighter blue and lighter green bars are showing the unmet need in that region, both for 2012 and 2018. And together, these comprise the total demand for modern methods, which is indicated by the height of the bars. The proportion of demand that is satisfied with a modern method is what we refer to as demand satisfied, and it's shown above the bars with a small pie chart. You can see in those wheels that all regions are making progress towards the SDG related to family planning, and some have actually already surpassed the proposed 75% demand satisfied SDG benchmark. But even in our fastest growing regions, we have a long way to go. And that's why Beth mentioned that there's no pathway to the SDGs and to universal access that doesn't pass through our FP2020 goals. Next slide, please. Ensuring that women and girls have the ability to make a full, free, and informed choice in selecting the method that will best meet their needs is fundamental to expanding contraceptive use in the 69 FP2020 focus countries. And many countries have made commitments to expand method choice. While no one indicator can completely measure full, free, and informed choice, FP2020 annually monitors several indicators that give us insights into factors that influence method choice. And while I won't cover all of these indicators today, I'll touch on a few highlights. Core indicator 10, or stockouts, reflects the availability of individual methods as well as a range of methods at a facility at a point in time, actually the day of a facility survey, providing an indication of contraceptive supply factors that may affect a woman's contraceptive choices. And this graphic shows the percentage of facilities in each country that were stocked out of particular methods that the facility offers on the day of the assessment. And you can see that in some countries, such as Haiti and Cameroon, where the horizontal bars are quite wide, they report stockouts across a large percentage of facilities for many methods, a clear sign of concern for contraceptive method choice. This marks actually the third year of reporting on this stockout indicator, but unfortunately our analysis of the data over time isn't revealing predictable patterns or trends that can be used for decision making, suggesting that we need to revisit actually how we're reporting stockouts and measuring stockouts and comparing across countries and years. So this is an issue for further exploration among the FP2020 partners. For indicator 14, the Method Information Index serves as a measure of quality of counseling, which is another important factor affecting contraceptive method choice. The index is a summary measure constructed from 3 questions asked of current contraceptive users about the occasion when they obtained their current method. And the questions that are asked are, were you informed about other methods? Were you informed about side effects? And were you told what to do if you experienced side effects? The Method Information Index total is the percentage of respondents answering yes to all 3 questions. And with good counseling, we expect people to receive all of this information. The graphic here shows regional comparisons of the Method Information Index and shows the Method Information Index for each method. What you can see is on average, users of implants and IUDs, shown in yellow and green bars, report the highest total Method Information Index values, while users of female sterilization, injectables, and pills generally report lower values. The average Method Information Index score of just 43% receiving full information across all methods for the 39 FP2020 focus countries, which actually have data, indicates substantial room for improvement in counseling and quality of care, which we hope will also improve method choice. For indicator 9, or the modern contraceptive method mix, illustrates the cumulative outcome of all the factors involved in each woman's contraceptive choice. The method mix measures the distribution of modern contraceptive users by the method they use. Now, this graphic shows just the most commonly used method in each country, with the different colors representing different methods. The fill of each of these boxes, each box being a country, shows the percentage of the method mix represented by that dominant method. You can see from the diverse colors on this graphic that modern contraceptive method mix varies greatly across the 69 FP2020 focus countries. We see a dominance of our orange color injectables, but a lot of variation in the dominant method across countries and across regions. If you look more deeply into the data, you'll actually see that there have been shifts in method mix. As Beth mentioned, implants have assumed a greater proportion of modern use. Female sterilization is declining in proportion to other modern methods in nearly all countries. But despite these shifts, the most common method in use in each country has remained largely unchanged over time. Lack of change, however, shouldn't necessarily be interpreted as a lack of progress. In many countries, the most common method in use may continue to be popular because it best meets the needs of women in that specific country context. What we do know is that research has shown that more contraceptive method choices supports a greater percentage of women using contraception. And we should strive for more choice, even if that doesn't dramatically change method mix or method use. Next slide, please. Finally, I'm proud to report that this year, in response to requests from across the partnership and from many of you, we've included a special analysis section on adolescents and youth. This section looks at data beyond the core indicator, adolescent birth rate, to suggest other important indicators for understanding country progress on meeting the needs of adolescents and youth. Available in this part of the report are data on demographics, on key life events such as the average age of marriage, first sex, and first birth, as well as a wealth of data on sexual activity, contraceptive use, and unmet need among both married and unmarried sexually active youth. In addition, for the first time we are producing or have produced a set of supplemental tables that will provide these data by country for all of these indicators, and something that we think will be a useful resource for the community. We look forward to hearing from all of you about the ways in which you put this data to use. And thanks again for the opportunity to share all of this measurement progress.
Thanks very much, Jason. Martin Smith here, Managing Director at FP2020. I'm going to take us through the very exciting financing section of both the print and digital reports for this year. We're very excited to announce the most comprehensive view yet that we have of the total financial landscape for family planning. And I'll take us through 4 elements over the course of the next 5 minutes. Firstly, these domestic government expenditures on family planning that Beth mentioned earlier, the core indicator 12, a key table to take you through in just 1 second. A second and very important element that will be very familiar to those of you who have been receiving and reviewing our report since 2012 is the regular donor government funding for family planning, and our colleague Adam Wexler of the Kaiser Family Foundation will take us through that in detail at the end of my section. Thirdly, I will take us through some estimates of the total expenditures on family planning across the 69 FP2020 countries. And lastly, I'll give some insights, brief insights into how all of this relates to country financial commitments, particularly those detailed financial commitments that were made in 2012 and in the 2017 FP Summit. So on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So, as we've mentioned, domestic government expenditures on family planning are being reported this year for the first time with validated data from 31 FP2020 focus countries, and this is core indicator 12. This is a groundbreaking achievement for the family planning sector. It's taken years of work and an intensive and wide-ranging effort from a number of key partners to establish the necessary methodologies to collect and analyze these expenditures, and then to work with countries through their critical in-country validation processes. All 31 countries you see in this table have approved and validated these numbers. Just to remind you, all domestic expenditures are defined as all government expenditure that supports family planning, including commodity purchases, demand creation campaigns, investments in training and research, and service delivery. Domestic government expenditure reflects a government's commitment to its family planning program, of course, and the key prospects for its long-term financial sustainability. Now, we recognize the significant challenges for many countries to ensure increased resources year on year when these countries often face crises that draw upon limited resources that are available. And it's very important to make sure that we're tracking FP expenditures as a habit year on year. The 31 countries in this table represent 77% of all the modern contraceptive users in the 69 FP2020 countries. Domestic expenditures amounts range from $200 million per annum in India, Bangladesh, and Indonesia. These countries that are funding the vast proportion of their programs from their own resources, of course, to less than $50,000 in Gambia and Mauritania. And we look forward to partnership with many of you on the line as we look to expand the number of countries in our progress report in 2019, and as we then enable ourselves to have a time series to start to pull out some of these trends year on year. So the 31 countries that are reporting expenditures include 26 FP2020 commitment-making countries. But domestic expenditures don't always map neatly onto countries' financial commitments for a couple of reasons. Firstly, due to the way that many country financial commitments are expressed, about half of these commitments are very specific and are therefore much easier to track. Half of the country domestic financial commitments are more general and thus a little trickier to track over time. Secondly, the expenditures data that we present here is for 2016 or earlier, and thus predates the updated country financial commitments that were made at the 2017 FP Summit. But this 2016 data, of course, provides us with critical baselines for many of those countries in terms of understanding how they are progressing with their domestic financing commitments. These expenditures, together with the commitment update questionnaires that you can see for FP 2020 countries on our website, provide initial insights on the status of these countries' financial commitments. And we have a section in this year's digital report that highlights the progress that is being made. For example, in the report, we speak about the 1/3 of commitment-making countries that are on track to meet their domestic financing commitments, and the roughly 1/3 that are close to being on track. About 1/3 of countries are off track to their domestic financing commitments based on our information at this stage. In the digital report, we also look at 5 countries in significant detail. We take 5 countries' domestic financing commitments and analyze them and highlight the very significant progress that is being made. And so on the next slide, you see the total spending on family planning across the 69 FP 2020 countries in 2016. And this better data on domestic government expenditures gives us an even more accurate picture of this total spending. And we put that total spending estimate at around $3.37 billion for the calendar year 2016. And of this, 48% is coming from donors, from governments and foundations. We draw from the Kaiser Family Foundation 2016 report for the bilateral government, the bilateral donor expenditures, as well as information that we have on foundations that we add to that. 34% is from domestic governments, 14% out of pocket paid by consumers over the counter, and the remaining 4% came from corporations, NGOs, and other domestic sources. It should be stressed that this is, of course, a total figure, and the domestic percentage here, this 34%, is heavily weighted by 7 very large countries, by India, Indonesia, and Bangladesh, that I have already mentioned, as well as Pakistan, Egypt, the Philippines, and Kenya. And those 7 account for half of all domestic expenditures in the 69 countries. And so these percentages should not be considered as representative of most FP 2020 countries. And indeed, in the digital report, we feature country-level graphics in these 4 portions for 4 countries, for Senegal, Kenya, Bangladesh, and Indonesia, that do show those proportions of domestic, donor, out-of-pocket, and other. And that makes for some fascinating reading. And as significant thanks to the expert advisory group on international family planning expenditures, who we've worked with very closely to bring you all of this information this year. And I'd like to hand over to a member of that group, to Adam Wexler, Associate Director of Global Health and HIV Policy at the Kaiser Family Foundation, to take us through the donor expenditures for 2017. Over to you. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Beth, and everyone at FP 2020 for giving me the opportunity to speak. And most importantly, hello to everyone online. Before we highlight the findings from our most recent report, I'd like to give you a little bit of background of how we got involved in this space and our methodological approach. We started collecting data on donor government funding for family planning following the 2012 summit. At that time, we adapted the methodology we've been using for over 15 years to track government spending on HIV. And that's an analysis we do annually with UNAIDS. The current report presents 2017 funding data, which is the most recent year available. So now we have data available for 2012 through 2017. So what are we including in our estimate? We include disbursement data from all members of the OECD DAC, and we do direct data collection from 10 donors. That's Australia, Canada, Denmark, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, the UK, and the US. Those donors account for approximately 98% of total donor government disbursements for FP. Data for all other OECD DAC members are pulled from the OECD CRS database. So what are the amounts that we're including in bilateral estimates? We are looking at any earmarked FP designated amount, as well as FP specific contributions to multilateral organizations. So for instance, the donor contribution to UNFPA supplies. We also include FP funding provided under other development assistance activities. So for instance, an education project that might include an FP component, we will include that where possible. Our data is validated by the 10 donors that we do direct data collection with. And so a couple of important points about this methodological approach. Some donors do not separate out family planning from broader reproductive health activities. So for that regard, we know that our estimate is above the actual amount. That being said, we know we're not capturing all FP funding provided under other development assistance activities. One big area to bring up is humanitarian assistance. We cannot capture FP funding under most of that funding provided. So by that regard, we know our estimate is low. It's something we're constantly working on, and if you have any thoughts or suggestions, we would love to hear them. In addition to the bilateral estimates, we also look at UNFPA donor contributions to UNFPA's core resources, and we'll get to that in a minute. So what do we find in 2017? Donor government funding for family planning activities increased in 2017 to 1.27 billion, rising approximately 74 million or 6% above the 2016 level, which was 1.2 billion. The increase in 2017 followed 2 years of declines, but was still below the peak level reached in 2014, which was 1.43 billion. In 2017, 5 donors, Canada, Denmark, the Netherlands, Sweden, and the UK, increased funding, while 2 donors, Australia and Germany, remained flat, and 3 donors, France, Norway, and the US, declined. It is important to note that while 2017 marked the second year of declines by the US, which is the world's largest donor, these decreases were due to disbursement delays and do not actually reflect decreases in US appropriations, which have been flat for several years. This is a point we'll get to in more detail shortly. This slide here shows the trend over time. So a couple things to point out. As we can see here, following the London Summit in 2012, funding increased in 2013 and 14 before declining in 2015 and 16, and then increasing again this most recent year in 2017. Please remember that in 2015, one of the reasons for the decline was the increase in the value of the US dollar compared to all global currencies. When you take that into account, we actually see that 2015 funding was actually flat. In addition, as I mentioned earlier, the US had declines in 2016 and 17. So again, when you take those declines into account and the fluctuation in currencies, we actually have seen flat funding since 2014. As I mentioned before, the US situation needs some further explanation. This slide here, the blue line, shows annual congressional appropriations. So each year, Congress provides a specific funding amount to be used for family planning activities. This funding, however, can be dispersed over a multi-year period. So what we see over time is a natural ebb and flow of when that funding is actually dispersed. For instance, in 2012, we see there was over 600 million in funding that was appropriated. However, 485 million was dispersed. And then over time, we saw increases in the US disbursement above the appropriated level, and then declines more recently. We fully anticipate that in the near future, the US disbursement rate will increase to catch up with the actual appropriated amount. Even after the decline in 2017, the US was the largest bilateral donor, accounting for 38% of total bilateral funding in 2017. The UK was the second largest bilateral donor, accounting for 22%, followed by the Netherlands at 15%, Sweden at 9%, and Canada at 5%. The US and UK have accounted for approximately 2/3 of funding over the entire period, and trends continue to be largely driven by these two donors. This slide here simply shows the breakdown by the donor governments for the full amount provided in 2017. As we can see here, the US provided 38%, followed by the UK at 22%. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we also look at donor contributions to UNFPA's core resources. Donors contribute two different ways, both through core resources and non-core. And as I mentioned before, contributions to UNFPA's non-core resources are included under bilateral totals if specified by the donor for FP activities. Again, UNFPA supplies is the example. Contributions to UNFPA's core resources are meant to be used for both programmatic activities, for instance, FP, but also HIV, as well as general operational support. In 2017, donors contributed more than $344 million to UNFPA's core resources, which was essentially flat compared to 2016 at almost $348 million. Among the donors profiled, 3 increased core funding, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, while 5 remained flat, Australia, Canada, Germany, the Netherlands, and the UK, and 2 decreased, France and the US. Sweden provided the largest core contribution to UNFPA in 2017 at almost $64 million, followed by Norway at almost $51 million, Denmark at $43 million, and the Netherlands at $37 million. It is important to note that in 2017, the current US administration invoked the Kemp-Kasten Amendment to withhold funding, both core and non-core contributions, to UNFPA. In the prior year, 2016, US contributions to UNFPA had totaled $69 million, including $37 million, almost $31 million in core resources, and an additional $38 million in non-core resources for other project activities. In 2018, the administration has already invoked the Kemp-Kasten Amendment, so we know that this funding will not again be going to UNFPA, an issue that I know that they're currently still wrestling with. Our report, Donor Government Funding for Family Planning in 2017, was officially released in conjunction with FP2020's progress report at the conference in Rwanda 2 weeks ago, I guess we're now at. And our looking ahead, our data collection for the 2018 family planning disbursements will begin in early 2019. So again, thank you to everyone online in FP 2020. I'll look forward to any questions you may have.
Great. Thank you so much, Adam. And thank you as well, Martin and Jason. We're now going to turn to the Q&A portion of the webinar. I think we've received 3 questions so far. So I'll start with the first one. Somebody has said, smaller organizations lay smaller impacts, but they work directly with service users. What is the number of smaller organizations working at small scale in FP 2020? So I think I'm going to answer your question a couple ways. So first of all of the organizations, regardless of size, who have made FP 2020 specific commitments are available on the website. So you can go and have a look at those. And again, you'll see the range from the youth-led organizations such as Copper Rose in Zambia, who just made their commitment, all the way up to IPPF, which of course is a global federation. So the door is open to any organization who wants to make their own commitment. When it comes to working at the country level on family planning and your engagement within the stakeholders, we don't measure by commitment maker. Rather, the community that's working together on family planning has a collective impact, and it's that collective impact that we measure and share. So I'm not sure how else to answer your question except to point you to those organizations that have made their own commitments, and then again to look at the countries themselves and who all is working and engaging in any specific area. And there's another question that just came in, and this one, Jason, is for you. And they ask, have any countries moved along the S-curve in the past year?
Thanks, Beth. In fact, we see lots of countries constantly moving along the S-curve, and we don't actually measure countries' specific path on the S-curve, but if we turned back to that slide on annual growth in contraceptive prevalence rate, that really shows that many countries in East and Southern Africa are in that period of rapid growth in the middle of the S-curve, where they're taking advantage of investing in their programs and a strong demand for contraceptives to quickly grow coverage. And they're, at the same time, they're expanding method choice. I'd also like to point out that many countries in West Africa that started off in the far left side of the S-curve have made great progress in expanding access to contraceptives, improving their delivery of contraceptives through their health systems, and have increased demand. And we are seeing a lot of progress in West African countries moving from what were very low rates of prevalence into a period of rapid growth. And if you look at the West Africa regional growth, actually without Nigeria, which has had somewhat slower growth, you'd actually see that West Africa's regional growth is approaching that of East and Southern Africa. So a lot of progress there, and they are moving into that, many of the countries are moving into that period of rapid potential growth. So thanks for the question.
Jason, the next one is for you as well. Somebody wrote, I noticed that unmet need from 2012 and 2018 for West Africa hasn't changed much or made a big difference. Is that correct?
I'm thrilled to see that someone was paying attention to that complicated graphic on demand satisfied. And you are right, it is correct. And across most of the regions, you don't see declines in unmet need. Most of our gains towards the SDG indicator on demand satisfied have been made up by increases in contraceptive use, not declines in unmet need. Now let's just look at West Africa in particular. West Africa, actually, the lack of decline in unmet need actually could be seen as a positive sign, because first of all, women don't report exactly an unmet need. They report first that they don't want to have another child in the next 2 years or at all, or another pregnancy, correct myself there. And they also report that they're not using a contraceptive method. We know that when contraceptive use is low in a country, that one of the first signs of future increases in contraceptive use is a desire to space or limit pregnancies. And so that it's possible that we'll see growth in unmet need in West Africa, and we have seen that in many countries, before we see the catch-up of contraceptive use. So one could say that a flat unmet need in West Africa is not a bad thing. It is a sign that there are increasing numbers of women who are thinking about spacing pregnancies and may in the future use a contraceptive method.
Great, thanks, Jason. I'm going to combine the next two questions together because I think the one leads to the other. The first is, FP2020 has conceded that it will not meet the goal set in 2012. Why will it fail? And the second question is, what are FP2020's plans post-2020? So with regard to the first question, I think it's been pretty apparent for a few years now that in terms of the assumptions that were made with regard to growth of new users, that we weren't hitting those overall trends in a way that would allow us to reach 120 million women and girls by 2020. But that's just one measure of progress. And as the commitments themselves demonstrate, there are multiple ways in which each commitment maker is seeking to improve the environment with regard to family planning. So while we won't hit that additional users until a few years farther out, there are considerable improvements across the FP 2020 sort of ecosystem, if you will, that are improving access to contraception and improving choice for women and girls, which is fundamental. So if you look back at some of the assumptions that were made about what it would take to reach the 120 million, many of the countries who set their own goals, and that 120 million is the aggregate of country goals or potential, many countries are on track to reach their goals, but many are not. And significantly, those that are not are in Asia, where if you look at the S-curve, they're much higher on the S-curve, older family planning programs. They've been working on family planning for 30, 40, 50 years. And as Jason said, when you get higher on that S-curve, your potential for growth slows down. So the other important factor about Asia countries is that's where you also see higher populations. So any percent or any increase is really harder to reach because of the massive population that the countries are trying to serve. So while we see potential for continued growth, it's at a slower rate than had originally been anticipated. But the corollary is if you look at Africa, where you see really great growth and that many countries are on track to meet or exceed their commitments. And in the case of Kenya, for example, they reached their commitment and they reset it and they're going even further. So if you look at that one measure of progress, it masks challenges, but it also, or it highlights challenges, but it masks the progress that is being made. And so we encourage you to dive deeper into the report to understand that. And while we, remain committed to that one metric of growth as being important, we don't think of that as the only way to measure success or failure of the partnership. And with that in mind, we want to take what we've learned and again, consult with all of you about what we build for 2020 to 2030 to continue on that path to reach the women and girls who have an unmet need and that will get us to universal access. So it's learning those lessons from what worked, what didn't, to get us to 2020 and toward the 120 million that we'll be using with you to shape what comes next. So we're excited. We don't have the answer for that because it's something that we want to build through information and feedback and creative building with all of you in the months to come. But that will be a process that we hope will be transparent and that is based on your feedback about what's working. So the next question is, have the commitments of the contraceptive manufacturers increased over the years? If so, can you provide details? So many of the manufacturers made original commitments in 2012, and then some were refreshed in 2017. Maybe Martin, I'll turn that over to you for additional details.
No, that's absolutely right, Beth. And I think what's been quite exciting over the last year has been the commitment DKT has made in partnership with Shanghai Dowa, which has brought in the Levoplan implant at a $6.90 price. The significant expansion that we've seen in DMPASC and the volume, the price guarantee at 85 cents. So, there's deeper engagement, I would say, over the last 6 years and a really clear understanding, as Jason was saying in his contraceptive method choice, of expanding the basket of choice at country level is helping to drive forward overall progress. And we're working in partnership with the manufacturers and a wide range of other stakeholders and NGOs to make that happen.
Thank you, Martin. Our next question is for Adam. Adam, this person wants to know, to what extent are you able to identify and count FP funding that is provided under development assistance activities? How big a piece is this of the overall funding pie?
That's an excellent question. And the first thing I'll say is it's a challenging one. In our analysis, we do a project level review of donor government funding. So we go through each of those projects, and where we see mention of family planning, we look to see if there's a percentage associated with that. So some donors, notably a good example is Canada, if they have a broad development assistance project, so one that's maybe largely focused on education, but there's an FP component or an HIV component, they include percentages of how much that project is dedicated to those other areas. So say a $1 million project where it's 10% FP funding, we will include that $100,000 under the Canadian total. Unfortunately, not all donor governments do this. Actually, the majority don't. So if a donor includes a similar project but doesn't have percentage, that FP amount, because we don't want to randomly assign an FP amount for that project. So by that token, we know we're not capturing everything. As an overall amount of the full package, it's relatively small, but we know it's not the full amount that's included. And we would love to have donors include more of a percentage basis on these broader projects. So if any of you could use your contacts to lobby for that, it would make my job much easier and would be very, very appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. So Martin, I'm going to combine 3 questions for you because they're all related to domestic government expenditures. So the first is, why is the domestic expenditure data important? I know you can talk about that all day. The second is, do we anticipate being able to collect new data for domestic government expenditures each year? And the third is, why is there such a variation in the amounts of domestic government expenditures among the countries?
3 superb questions. So why is it important? Well, it's important for several reasons. As I said, at a fundamental level, we really are looking at long-term trends here as countries move towards financing increasing proportions of their own programs towards longer-term sustainability. And that, to some extent, answers the third question, which is that there is great variation. So we do see Bangladesh, India, and in Indonesia, as I said earlier on, in the $200 million per annum range. And India and Indonesia are financing the vast proportion, 99% proportion of their own family planning programs from their domestic resources. And we see a spectrum, really, of programs that are funding the very significant proportion from their own resources to those that are just getting started. And that's not to deride at all the important amounts that countries are committing to and allocating and expending. And that process is a very lengthy one that requires significant political will and sort of bureaucratic commitment to ensure that financing for family planning that's committed to actually ends up getting spent. And we've seen some very encouraging, albeit fairly small, domestic financial commitments that are now increasing over time in a country such as Madagascar, for example, in countries such as Senegal and Cote d'Ivoire and Burkina Faso in relation to their financing of commodities from domestic resources. While these amounts are not huge when you look at them in the table in relation to these 200 million figures, they're very important in relation to the overall, the long-term sustainability of family planning financing in the country. It's also important that we do track these over time, and that answers the second question here, I think. We will be reporting on Core Indicator 12 in 2019, and we pull this information from a variety of sources, from the government's own accounts in the case of India at this stage, from family planning spending assessments that are conducted by our colleagues at Avenir Health, from our colleagues at WHO, or the System of Health Accounts, and colleagues within the UNFPA NEEDY survey as well. So we anticipate having a significant number of countries that we will be able to report on in 2019. As I say, for those countries where we have 2016 and earlier data, then presenting a time series which will allow us to track these over time. And to come back to the importance question, will enable us then to be able to track these expenditures over time and relate them to these critically important domestic financing commitments which countries made in 2012 and 2017, and have a much better understanding of how countries are tracking 2019 and onwards.
Okay, sorry, and there's a follow-up that came in, just a suggestion for you, Martin, that somebody wants you to consider, that we should present country expenditure per capita, WRA, instead of lump sums per country comparisons. So,
well, we'll certainly look into that next year, and obviously that would get over some of the issues of the 7 large countries that I articulated earlier. So we will have a look at that and see if that illuminates the data further. Thank you very much for that suggestion.
okay, Jason, you're up next. The next question is, does what the report say about the S-curve and where countries should focus their efforts hold true for adolescent populations?
Thanks for the question. Just a reminder that the S-curve is based on historic rates of growth in contraceptive use at a country level, actually among married women. We don't have that same historic trend for both married and unmarried sexually active. So to say that the S-curve is an average over a country. It does not necessarily hold true for hard to reach populations, underserved populations. And we know that countries that are progressing rapidly in the S-curve and also countries that are at the high end of the S-curve also need to focus on leaving no one behind and reaching those hardest to reach populations. So what I think we saw through the Family Planning 2017 Summit was a real attention, not just to growth, which is an important part of the commitments, but also towards reaching those underserved populations. So we like to think that the S-curve is part of a calculus of thinking about investments, but it's not the only calculus, and that one also needs to pay attention, particularly as adolescents and youth. And we were thrilled to see so much attention in the commitments to reaching adolescents and youth. And we think that that's going to be an important part of countries' investments moving forward. So the S-curve does not give us full insight into that, but we are using the rest of this data to try to make smart investments, particularly for adolescents and youth. Thanks.
Thank you, Jason. And it is important to note that adolescents in particular are the #1 issue that people want to talk about. When we shape focal point workshops, when we look at the revitalized commitments, adolescents and youth are front and center in the majority of commitment makers as well, particularly from the country. So there's a growing understanding and a desire and an openness to learn from each other and to talk about that issue and to try to make progress. So while the S-curve may not be at this point in time the most effective tool for that, I think I'm excited about what's going to be coming forward in the next few years, given the intensified interest and focus across the community on reaching adolescents and youth. And we of course look forward to everybody's engagement on that. So I think that's we have one more question. So we have one question that says, I want to know if refugees and IDPs were incorporated during the data collection process. If not, are we looking toward that direction in subsequent reports? So no, IDPs are counted as populations are counted. So assuming a system is in place to capture provision of services for IDP populations by their own governments, then those are captured. But for refugee populations that are hosted by another country, then those are not captured within FP 2020 processes. Jason, do you want to elaborate on that at all?
Sure, just to say that the answer is, as Beth mentioned, largely no, because we know that the surveys and data systems that we rely upon often don't collect data directly in camps or in large settings where where displaced people are living. So if surveys are collected there, or if service statistics, as Beth mentioned, are recorded in health systems for these populations, then yes, but generally we know that they're left out of that data collection, because data collection for those tools is largely done through government health systems and through household surveys. That said, there was at the 2017 summit a roadmap that was formed by the community that works on family planning and humanitarian assistance, and a roadmap towards new data collection tools. And it's something that the community is actively looking at, which is how do we get a better sense of service delivery to these populations, and still a work in progress, and something that we hope you'll join us in working towards. Thanks.
Thank you, Jason. So I think that's the last question that's come in. I want to thank you all for taking the time to be with us today to learn more about the report. We look forward to your engaging on the website, to your feedback about how all of this material resonates with you, what more we can do to optimize the experience of this digital report and our website as well. And I'll just end on that note again of looking forward to 2019 as a time of consultation with all of you about what comes next. The door really is open to share your perspectives about what's worked, what more we can do, where we go together. There's a commitment to partnership to 2030, but the shape of that partnership remains for all of us to build together. So we really look forward to doing that with you in 2019. And for many of you, this might be the last contact we have through the end of the year. So we want to wish you all happy holidays and a very happy and productive 2019. Thank you again for your partnership. And on behalf of FP2020 Secretary, we'll just say goodbye.